I was pretty radical. I was what once used to be considered extreme left. Facts don't matter to people. People have been bombarded with emotionally evocative propaganda. Every single case of a government system turning against its Jews has ultimately resulted in the complete destruction of that country, and it always will. People think of themselves as like heroes for social justice. It's really intoxicating, and it's really like an ego boost, but it's not always the right thing to do.
Ateret Shmuel is a human rights and indigenous rights advocate, and she's director of the nonprofit Indigenous Bridges. And I'm so happy to have you with me. Welcome, Ateret. Thank you.
Hi, it's an absolute honor.
Okay, so I found you on Instagram, and what really drew me to you is the fact that you were involved in these left-wing spaces, and then you had to pull back. That is a fascinating and also, I think, a very common story for Jewish rights advocates. Can you tell me about your story?
Yeah, I think it's becoming much more common now. I grew up very, 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 very left-wing. I grew up in Boston. My family is very progressive, like extremely progressive. And I was just sort of like birthed into this world that was, very conscientious of geopolitical happenings and political happenings and racism and things like that. And we've always been very active. My father marched with Martin Luther King. My father's actually 93 years old now. And so he was very active in the civil rights movement and many other political movements and social movements in the US. My mother also. And I grew up kind of rough in Boston. I was sort of like in the punk scene and was really active in the world of social justice and human rights, and was really cognizant of the issues with racism in the US because I'm like pretty much the only white passing member of my family. So I was like very aware of the impact of like race and racism in the US, and it really upset me. I'm like violently allergic to injustice. And so I started being really active in politics and political activism and social justice organizing. And I was pretty radical. I was what once used to be considered extreme left. And I don't know that my politics or ethics have changed very much, but the goalposts of the left and the right certainly have. And so I no longer recognize the communities that I used to be a part of because they have all become like extremely racist and problematic. The groups that I was involved with then now do a lot of things that I find atrocious. Like a lot of, good little social justice warriors. I was like involved in a lot of anti-Israel activism as well, especially because I'm Jewish, and was given this whole narrative by all of these people that I really trusted that Jews were white European colonialist settlers who were illegally occupying poor brown indigenous Palestinian land and committing genocide and apartheid and human rights atrocities. And this was like 25 years ago, like these were the narratives that started off then within these circles.
You're Jewish. How did you believe that?
Because I grew up secular. Like my family is Jewish, but like we didn't really have, I didn't grow up with any like real understanding of what that meant. I didn't really grow up knowing my people's history, understanding. I mean, I have a big part of my family is from Iraq. So it's not like I thought that all of us were from Europe. It's just that it's easier just to accept information if it's coming at you from all angles than it is to sort of like push back against it, especially if you don't feel safe and comfortable and like strong enough in your own opinions at that point. And as I was growing up, I didn't really know very much about who Jews were, what we believed, where we came from, things like that. That wasn't an important part of my family's life. And I grew up, outside of my home a lot. So it just wasn't something that mattered to me until I was like 18. Actually, part of that happened through my work with Indigenous people. I remember having these like deep conversations with my friends who were like Native, and they were like, you're also from like an ancient tribal people. Like you also have really cool traditions. Why don't you look into yours? And I was like, Judaism, And then I did. I did start looking into my own traditions, and I was like, oh, actually, we do have amazing parts of this. Like, oh, actually, all of the things that I was looking for outside of this are in our own people's traditions.
Is it education? Is that the problem? Because I see a lot of people that are fighting against, it seems like against their own best interests, that are Jewish.
The thing about Jews who have internalized a lot of this propaganda, I think we have to look at it from like a little bit of a sociological and psychological perspective as well, because otherwise it just doesn't make sense. But if you take a Jew like me who grew up, like in the inner city, and most of the people we know growing up aren't Jewish, and our families don't care about being Jewish so much. Like, we're Jewish, but we don't like know what that means. We don't know anything about Judaism. We don't know anything about Torah. We don't know anything about our ancestry. We don't know anything, like they don't have any of the armor or ammunition to fight back against these narratives that are being thrown at them from other people. Like, if you don't know the Jews aren't from Europe, there's a lot of pressure on secular, assimilated Western Jews to just like leave their Jewishness behind. But if they don't, they face real danger, especially now. They're ostracized from all sorts of spaces and communities. The overt anti-Semitism and the like sexy language of human rights and social justice and anti-Zionism is extremely normalized and prevalent now. And so Jews are really left with two options. One is to abandon their identity and be accepted into all of these spaces that they value, especially because without a foundation of like understanding our own roots and having like culture and community and stuff like that, human beings need meaning. Human beings need connection. Human beings need to feel a sense of like purpose and belonging. And if that doesn't come from Jewish community, they're going to seek it out elsewhere. And for most of Americans, their religion and their culture is their political party. That's their tribe. And so that becomes like the most important thing for people is like this, like belonging to their tribe. So basically you can choose to embrace your identity and be ostracized from all of these spaces and actually now face like physical violence, or you can abandon your identity and be welcomed in and accepted and loved. And not only that, but if you're a Jew who speaks up against Zionism and the evils of Israel and all of the nonsense that's out there, then you not only get coddled and platformed, but you get this level of celebrity status, and that's very intoxicating. So it's either you're loved and adored and platformed, or you're hated and face violence. And for a lot of Western Jews that really don't care so much about or know so much about their Jewish identity, it's difficult to resist the draw towards being tokenized.
One of the things that I see a lot, and I see this a lot online, is this desire to tell our story for us. So you have people that are trying to tell us what the narrative is, tell us where we come from, tell us what we believe, tell us who we are. And you're like, wait, what are you talking about? It's kind of like a way to erase Judaism.
Yes. It's really quite spectacular that, especially within these circles of like social justice and human rights, and like the more progressive and like woke circles, there's this real push to allow minority groups to define their own experience and to speak to their own experience and to define their experience of bigotry and oppression. And the only group that's excluded from that is Jews. And especially in places like America that have like a very extreme black-white racial dichotomy that's sort of like based on European colonists who stole Africans and enslaved them and then colonized the Americas and commit genocide against, brown indigenous Americans. And then you have an entire legal system that's sort of based on maintaining that hierarchy. Like, Americans simply can't fathom the fact that not everyone exists within this black-white racial dichotomy, and that not everyone is either black or white or brown. There's whole areas of the world that don't fit so neatly into this like black versus white category. And because of the immigration policies of America, like way back in the day, the overwhelming majority of American Jewry is Ashkenazi. Not all of American Jewry. We have a huge population of Persian Jews. We have a huge population of Syrian Jews. We have a huge population of Sephardi Jews.
Yes, there's a reason that the American Jews are white passing, that's why they were led into America.
Correct, but we were not considered white at all.
Exactly.
Until the 70s.
I mean, when the world was divided into black and white, and Noah Tishby says this brilliantly in her book, Difficult Conversations with a Jew with Emmanuel Acho, she says that when the world was divided into black and white, Jews were considered black.
Once upon a time,
and it's only in the past, like 2 generations, that Jews have become, quote unquote, white passing.
Right.
And definitely not during the Holocaust. We were not considered white.
No, that's why we were slaughtered.
Exactly.
We can't win. But here's the thing. Anti-Semitism exists on all sides of all political spectrums. But I think we can sort of break it down a little bit. On the right, the anti-Semitic narratives are that Jews are brown, Middle Eastern, foreign, rabble-rousing socialists who will stop at nothing to overthrow the established order and allow for the proletariat to take over. And so we must stop them in order to maintain civilization, right? So that's right-wing anti-Semitism. Also that Jews pollute the moral and ethical experiences of the good white people. And on the left, Jews are white, European. They are the establishment. They're the fat cat, money-grubbing capitalists who benefit off of the backs of the oppressed people of color and uphold white supremacy and racism in America, and therefore must be stopped so that there can be justice. And so neither of these narratives fit us, right? We are a not large, we're actually quite a small group of people, considering we're like maximum 15 million people globally.
0.2% of the American population.
0.2, yes.
And 0.02 of the global population.
Yes, that is true. And yet, we really live rent-free in people's minds. Like, people think about us a lot and assume that we're like a huge majority group because we are so visible in the media. We're kind of like enigmatic, and people come up with all crazy...
It also makes us a minority, which is crazy because we're also not included into programs like DEI. We're not considered worthy of minority status. But I want to ask you, at what was there like a defining moment where you realized, oh my gosh, this is not for me, or they're wrong, or everything I thought about Judaism is not what it is?
In terms of like my activism against Israel, in terms of my... So yeah, I actually just made a video about this, but the real turning point for me was the Marmara, the flotilla in 2010. That was really the watershed moment for me, because I had been, I grew up really radical. I used to organize for all of these organizations and groups and whatever. I went to college. I went to an Ivy League, which was super radicalized and funded by Qatar. And I was in the department that had Qatari plants in it. And so I, received all of this like indoctrinated anti-Semitic propaganda from like people that I sort of like considered like gurus, And
how did you know that they were Qatari plants?
I didn't then. The funding for the Department of Middle Eastern Studies is like, there's like millions of dollars from Qatar that go into it. And when you do that, when Qatar gives these like huge endowments to the arts at liberal arts universities, they get to sort of like chair departments, and they get to put in professors, and they get to push and influence the curriculum of the university. And so I remember sitting in a class and like having a professor tell me that Israel was a like illegal colonialist, European colonialist settlement. Like, then this is like back in the day. And I was like, but I didn't, at that point.
My family was persecuted in Iraq. What are you talking about? Yeah.
Part of my family was persecuted in Europe, and part of my family was persecuted in the Middle East. And like, my dad is 93. He was alive during the Holocaust. And so, I kind of was like, But I didn't feel like I had enough information to fight back. And also, I am white passing. I am aware of that. And I am completely cognizant of the fact that it does give me a level of privilege in spaces in the United States. And as such, I was, like very much in this world of understanding intersectionality, back when intersectionality actually meant something. Now it's just whatever. And understanding that I do experience white privilege, and therefore I need to own my privilege, and I need to not take up space. And, when things are broken down into like black and white, where white is bad and black is good, and you need to like not, like you assign value to people's opinions based on the color of their skin, which is often really what identity politics is. It's like the more boxes you check off in like the minority, like, neurodivergent, gender fluid, whatever, like the more fringe communities that you're a part of, the more currency your voice has within these spaces. And the less minority boxes you tick off, the less currency your voice has. So I never felt safe or comfortable countering any of the disinformation or misinformation, especially in a university setting where it was like, felt really dangerous. Because I felt like I was perceived as white, which is sometimes I still am in those spaces.
Can I just sidebar here? Because I know a lot of people might be listening to this that are in college or that have to fill out the SATs. And I want to just say that it always bothered me when they have the select what you are, but they never had Jewish. Because I'm
there's
not
a reason for that.
white. Oh, yeah?
There's a reason for that. The Jewish community itself fought really hard in like the 60s and 70s not to be othered. Because after the Holocaust, when we were tracked and marked and people wanted to know like where we were and whatever, we didn't want that to happen to our children, right? So the Jewish community in the States is like, you know, many of them came over during the pogroms, right, from Europe. And so they had been in the States for several generations. And they were like, okay, you know what, we're here. We're assimilated. Why should we other ourselves anymore? Why can't we be considered part of the, you know, like everybody else? Why aren't we just American? And so they worked really hard to get rid of this categorization because it felt like a threat to their existence. And so it was like a safety measure. But ultimately now, in the current anti-Semitic environment that exists in the US, it backfired and it's harming us. You know, like if you look at like hate crime statistics, Jews are like way above any other minority or religious group, especially per capita. We're a tiny, tiny minority. And yet, you know, like we're only given white status. We're only given the mantle of whiteness if it serves to discredit our experiences or if it serves to invalidate our voices or the oppression that we face, or silence us when we're talking about all of the violence that our communities experience. Even when I was a kid, somebody came and spray painted swastikas on my house. People used to sing songs about me being Jewish. Like there was like a whole song about like, and me being a Jew, like when I was in school. I went to public school. And it was to the point where like, unless somebody was actively like trying to kill me, I didn't like the hatred and the aggression and the racism. I didn't even, it didn't bother me. It didn't affect me because it wasn't so bad, you know, and it's
normalized.
It was normalized back then. And that was, I'm older than I look. and now it's just like everywhere and it's so normalized and it's cool. And that's the really upsetting and disturbing part. And the craziest piece of it though is I don't even know how to say this without swearing, like the fact that the people who are responsible for the most atrocious and egregious acts of like anti-Semitic violence are the ones who claim to be anti-racist and claim to be anti-fascist while literally spouting fascism. Like literal Nazi talking points come out of the mouths of people who genuinely believe themselves to be anti-Nazi. And they can't see it because they don't know enough. And also their bigotry and their own like this whole like indoctrination.
It feels like it's on purpose though. Like it feels like when they say like the words genocide or when Greta Tunberg says she was kidnapped, it kind of feels like they're using these words on purpose to cut the Jewish people, to like minimize actual genocides that we experienced or actual kidnappings that our people have experienced.
So it feels that way for us, for sure, because it is gaslighting, narcissistic abuse on like a global scale. But from them, it's not that. They genuinely think that that's true. In my experience, people genuinely believe, and how could they not, right? Like if you look at the all-out war and the complete infiltration in like all of these systems where people receive information, the news, social media, Wikipedia. Do you know about the whole Wikipedia thing? Politicians,
100%.
Celebrities, universities, everywhere people turn for information has been completely infiltrated by these by anti-Semitic propagandists and Islamist colonialist propagandists. And it's actually dangerous on so many levels, not the least of which being is that it's a soft power colonialist move. It's like in preparation for taking over the West. That's what happens. But also it's creating these spaces where rabid anti-Semitism is running wild, and it's directly leading to violence against a minority group, while also justifying that violence by claiming that minority group is actually like an evil majority group who deserves it because they're doing horrible things, So it's just blood libel. It's not even like new or original or creative blood libel. It's just the same recycled Jews kill babies, Jews kill innocent women, Jews are the evil ones, Jews control the world, Jews, but the Jews kill baby one really gets me because, in the medieval era,
the blood libel and it's these old stories that are lies.
Same blood libel. Instead of matzah, now it's 14,000 babies will starve. Instead of matzah, now it's Israel bombed the Gaza Baptist Hospital. Instead of matzah now, it's Israel is making innocent infants starve to death. Look at these babies that we took from the rubble, even though they're dolls and everybody's in, pristine, bright, clean clothing without a scratch on them. And people are too dumb.
And the cameras are there.
Of course, perfectly. I worked in the Palestinian territories for like a really long time, and I spent a lot of time. I still work with Palestinians. In certain areas, there are only two lucrative careers. One is being a terrorist, because you get if you are caught or killed in the act of trying to murder a Jew or murdering a Jew, your family gets a stipend for the rest of their lives, which is far more than you could make like working a normal job. Or two, working in like this Hollywood industry, like filming, makeup, production, all of that. That's like one of the most lucrative jobs you can have, unless you work with the PA or Hamas, which is even more lucrative. The propaganda creation industry in the Palestinian territories is enormous, and people have no idea about that in the West. They genuinely think that like all of these like horrific, like emotionally evocative, disturbing videos that they see all the time on social media are real. And some of them are real, but they're from Syria or Lebanon or Yemen or other countries that are actually...
For a cancer hospital.
Oh yeah. The cancer babies that they're showing that...
But I wish that people could like use their common sense. You have photos of children that are clearly can't eat or whatever, but the adults are well fed. Like, how is that possible that there's a famine when the adults are well fed? It's just... Can you take us back to the flotilla? You're starting to tell us about the moment where you realized that there was a lot of BS.
Yeah. So in 2010, I was working in human rights. I was involved in a lot of like human rights and social justice groups. And I actually had access to the documentation, the reports, the footage of what went down. And I saw it happen in real time. And I knew the players involved. So I work with the Kurds. And so I know a lot about the people that attack the Kurds. Basically, in 2010, there was a flotilla from Turkey. It was supposed to be like a peace and aid flotilla. It was sent from Turkey. And it was all of these like actual agitators who had Islamist terrorist association. And they said that they had humanitarian aid for Gaza and they wanted to break the blockade. And even the UN, who is also stacked against Israel, was completely legal. And like any country in the world, Israel has laws about who can enter into their airspace and water space and land space. Like you can't just like walk into another country and like expect for that to be okay or not to be stopped by border police anywhere in the world. Germany.
I say this all the time. Like there's something called customs that you have to go through. Like, why do you think that you don't have to go through customs?
Right. So the basis upon which a lot of the Free Palestine movement is like founded on is this belief that Israel is illegitimate and therefore nothing that they say or do is real. Like they don't have to be respected. So Israel basically was like, hey, you guys can't come into our water space. And they were like, screw you, we don't believe in you, and we're going to do what we want, and free Palestine, and you guys are monsters and Nazis. And Israel was like, well, you know what, we actually do exist, and we actually do have laws, and if you come into our water space, we're going to have to stop you. And they were like, middle fingers to you, Israel, we do what we want, free Palestine. And so they came in, and the Israeli Coast Guard gave them ample warning, and they were like, you may not enter these lands. Like, I saw the whole thing go down. And the people on the flotilla knew exactly what they were getting into. It was meant to be a spectacle back then, just like this one was now, except it was less of a spectacle. This one was just disgusting. But they wanted to get arrested. They wanted to make a scene. They had camera crews on board. The Israeli Coast Guard boarded the ship and were attacked. And the Israeli Coast Guard boarded the ship without live ammunition. They didn't have bullets. I think they had paintball guns. And they were attacked as soon as they boarded the ship with pistols, with knives, and with steel pipes. And it's all on film. The Coast Guard had body cams, and it was filmed by the people on the Marmara. And that footage was released to the public. And there was a skirmish, and people were injured. It just was so clear to me that, like, you had a bunch of agitators who were actively trying to break the law, international law, who were not doing so in good faith, that they actually just wanted to cause violence and drama and make a scene. It was found that they actually were carrying weapons on this flotilla. They did not have any humanitarian aid. Nobody on this flotilla was qualified to deliver humanitarian aid. Nobody had any emergency medical training or was involved in any NGOs or anything like that did anything humanitarian. They just wanted to cause trouble. And they did. And it just seemed so clear to me what happened. I was like, literally any other country would have just killed these people. And yet Israel very gently boarded the ship, didn't even have live ammunition, was attacked, didn't kill people in the same way that, could you imagine if that happened in the US?
No,
Yeah. And Israel was like, no, you know what, guys, you can't come in. I hear your big feelings. You want to come in, you want to help, but you can't do it. So you're going to have to turn you around. And they're like,
Well, just like the Greta Tunberg ship, that ship, they also offered them the option to drop off their supplies in Ashdod. They said, go drop it there. We'll bring it to them. And same thing with Greta Thunberg. They didn't want, I don't even think
this last flotilla with Greta was much more of a disgusting display of Islamist colonialism and anti-Semitism and pure unadulterated racism. These were fascists and the whole thing was funded by Hamas. That's been shown.
Yeah, and there was a person on the ship that had connections to Hamas.
Several.
I understand. Yeah,
Several.
And if you have a person on the ship I think he was calling himself a journalist, but he had connections and he was filmed with Khania, whatever.
Yeah, I mean, that's basically par for the course at this point, is that you have these people who are bad actors who are exploiting people's emotions. Look at what happens in Gaza right now. The second that there's actual war, everybody's suddenly a pregnant child who's also a doctor and in the press. A 7-year-old
a woman doctor that has 9 children of the same age.
That also was in the news several years before, the exact same woman.
And her children also died then. Yeah. Right. You're somebody that's in these circles, these very left-wing circles, progressive circles. Can you also explain to me how I understand that the progressive mindset is to center real experiences? How come when it comes to Israel and Hamas, the Palestinian people, the actual people that live in Gaza that are fighting Hamas, why don't they get to have their own voice? They're literally fighting for their lives to have a voice. They're risking their lives to speak up, and Western progressives are muting them.
I don't think Western progressives actually care at all about the Palestinian people. Western progressives are really just parroting Qatari propaganda when it comes down to it, and they're being funded by, there a lot of the people.
But why? If you don't have a dog in the fight, I don't understand. Why people are so passionate that have never been here.
Yeah, I've had people who have never been here, couldn't point to this place on a map, who are posting rabidly anti-Semitic blood libel propaganda online. I reached out to them and I was like, hey, I just lived through this and one of my friends just got murdered, and I can send you the video because Hamas live streamed it. Why are you doing this? And they're like, I can't talk to you about things like this. I'm like, why? I'm being respectful. They're like, I just don't have the bandwidth to handle this kind of insidious propaganda. I'm like, I'm my real lived experience of somebody you've known for decades is insidious propaganda, whereas you parroting nonsense that you heard on TikTok is somehow not. What happens is people.
Greta Thunberg turned her back to apparently she was shown the footage from October 7th and famously turned her back on the footage, refusing to look at it. Why? If you're claiming to be for human rights and I don't understand the motive.
It's psychology and sociology. So much of their ego is people are emotionally really attached to this party, this tribe, this religion that they're a part of, this woke leftism. And I'm not saying this isn't exclusively leftists, although I think the biggest dangers to humanity come from the left right now, specifically the partnership between the left and radical Islam, but also the right has a similar, this also exists on the right. So I just wanted to qualify that. But people are so emotionally invested in their party association, in their platform, in their community, that is politic, that is this it's a cult, basically. And anything that threatens this piece of their identity, which they're so attached to, is too dangerous to their sense of self. If you're progressive, right? You imagine yourself progressive because you're good. You're, enlightened and educated, and, you pay attention to the news and geopolitics, and you're so worldly that you read, outside news sources like Al Jazeera and the BBC, which is, for all of the elite, educated academic. And this is a piece of your identity. You are a humanitarian. You care about the world. You don't let bad things happen in your name. You marched in the Women's March. You care about LGBTQ communities. You were part of Black Lives Matter. Like, how could you be a bad person? You couldn't possibly be a bad person.
And so we saw this narrative infiltrate the Women's March and Black Lives Matter.
I mean, the Women's March literally platformed Linda Sarsour, who is a neo-fascist. She really wants to bring Sharia law to the United States. And she openly said that. And everyone's like, oh, wow, she's so exotic. And like, we really need to,
exotic.
A brown Muslim woman. What a minority. And
we have to point it out that when they were asking about their platform for the Women's March, they included all the isms: racism, sexism, transphobia, homophobia. They would not even think about anti-Semitism. That was not part of their platform, even though it was asked.
Zionism was one of the bad ones. But you have to understand, like, in America, Americans and Westerners are so geopolitically isolated and illiterate that they don't understand that Muslims make up one of the biggest colonialist majority groups in the world. It's like, what is it, a quarter of the world?
And part of the slave trade.
They're responsible for the transatlantic slave trade and still actively involved in the trade of African human beings to this day. If you look at what's going on in Libya right now, it's insane. And it's been going on, and nobody cares because it doesn't fit their narrative. And it's not about what's real and what is actually happening. It's about what the group says we must talk about. It's cult think, it's group think, and it's very dangerous. And that's what's happening. And there are so few, I keep seeing more and more people who are coming out of it being like, I knew that what was happening was wrong. I knew that like what we were doing didn't make sense. It always felt weird to me, but I couldn't get away from it. I couldn't break free. Because once you stand up to it, you lose all of your friends. Like I almost everybody I grew up with has blocked me. Not because, and they've said that I've changed, even though I haven't. Like one of my best friends for 15 years, after October 7th, I saw her posting all this like, free Palestine, la 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 la, destroy Israel. And I'm like, boo, I'm here. Like I'm Israeli. Like, do you think that do you still care about me? She's like, yeah, I guess so. But like, you've become so different now that we no longer have anything in common. And I was like, I'm literally a career activist. Like, what do you mean?
Well, I wasn't an activist. I was a journalist. And after October 7th, people just quietly dropped off. Friends that I've had for years stopped commenting, liking, calling. But right. and I wasn't even an activist. I was just openly Jewish and Israeli. Yeah. And I was always very fair and very even-handed.
But if you challenge the groupthink, if you challenge the party lines, if you go against what the chairman says, like if you go against any of this, it's you cannot possibly be tolerated in these spaces. Like you're the enemy. There's a huge, well-funded, multi-pronged psyop that's been going on for generations now that people don't know about because it's like all these little incremental changes, all these little things in all these little communities all over. And like people don't see like the gestalt picture of things. Like since the 1970s, the PLO and Qatar and Iran have been trying to infiltrate Native American communities. Nobody knows that. But why do we think that the narrative that Palestinians are indigenous and Jews are European got into that community so hard? Because the PLO pushed it in since the 1970s.
How have the indigenous communities in America, how have they been able to resist this infiltration?
Some of them have not.
Oh.
There's a real problem. And it's really heartbreaking for me because I've worked with Native American communities for decades. Like those were the people that I considered my nearest and dearest. And all of the people that I really considered my nearest and dearest haven't been like turned. But basically you have a big difference in opinions based on sort of like age. Right. So in my experience, the Native communities that I've worked with, which are many, 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 many of them, and all over, I see often that the people over 45, and especially in positions of leadership, tend to view Israel very favorably. You know, a lot of people don't think about us at all. But the people that do think about us, the people that do have an opinion, over 45 and 50, that are in positions of leadership, that have, you know, traveled, tend to be quite favorable towards Israel. And some of them even view Zionism as a successful land back movement, which it is. But the people under 40 and 45 have been educated by fascists and Islamists on TikTok. And the ones that are the most indoctrinated are the ones who like got off the res and went to university, you know, like went to like a liberal arts school and ended up being completely indoctrinated by like Qatari and Iranian plans. And because it's such a big thing for them, you know, they're so proud of having got off the res and gone to these universities that they're really emotionally attached to this kind of information. So they spread it, and it's really, really damaging, which is why there's been such anti-Semitic hatred. Like Native American communities who have never met Jews. They've never seen a Jew, but they'll show up to Free Palestine marches, you know, and some of them get paid to do so. And
have you seen this? They've told you they get paid?
I've definitely seen people offer to pay for Native Americans to come out. Yeah. They're tokenizing them. They're making a spectacle of them, which unfortunately the Native community has had to deal with for a really long time from all sorts of places. Because nobody actually cares about the Native Americans either in the US. The Native Americans, the situation for Indigenous people in the United States is in some cases really, really appalling in a way that I don't think most Americans actually understand. Native American, like women and children and members of the LGBTQ community disappear without a trace, and like the law enforcement doesn't bother to find them. And there's like a whole thing. So the Native communities are being used as pawns, which I find disgusting because I actually really care about them. And it's really sad because they want to be doing good things like so many other people. They want to be standing up for what's right and what's just. And they're being given all of this disinformation by people that they don't know not to trust, you know? In the same way that American leftists are as well.
It's so interesting to me that you were able to pull yourself out of this world. How did you have the power and the courage to do so?
I mean, I'm still an activist. You know, I run an international nonprofit organization and I fight for Indigenous rights and human rights to this day. I just actually care about real Indigenous rights and real human rights and real social justice, as opposed to like all these like predators that have embedded themselves in these organizations and are trying to do what I find the most abhorrent and evil thing possible, which is to be basically a bad guy that's gotten into an organization that's meant to stop bad guys from doing bad things. And so the bad guys have taken over so that they can get away with stuff. So I
see there's a lot of infiltration in a lot of humanitarian organizations. This is also why it turns out that World Central Kitchen was bombed
working with Hamas for years.
Right, exactly. They were working with Hamas because Hamas and terrorists basically understand to like ingratiate themselves into these groups.
Right. And also, and the UN is completely overrun with these monsters. So like, again, it's all of these places, all of these bodies, all of these systems of information where people get their information from or like form their opinions. If they're not here, they don't see what's actually happening. They're like,
so well, what's the antidote? Is the antidote to visit Israel?
I think everybody should come here and see this for themselves. I really do. But I also think that that can't be it because most people won't do that. Everybody in the world is not going to come see all of the AIDS trucks going into Gaza. Everybody in the world is not going to watch the footage that Hamas shot on October 7th. Everybody in the world is not going to sit here and shield their children's bodies with their own during missile attacks from Yemen, you know, like we have to do on a daily basis. So I think a really important piece of it is that the people who can speak up need to. All of us need to fight. We don't have another choice. Silence is going to result in massacres. All of us need to be fighting right now. There's no other way. And I feel like I've seen a lot of people step up to that. And it needs to be people outside of the Jewish community as well. People have such indoctrinated and deeply embedded anti-Jewish biases that they're unaware of and they truly deny. And so other people need to step up as well. There's a reason that we have like a space in the Holocaust museums that's like for the righteous of the nations, right? Because there were so few. But the ones that did step up saved lives. And the same is true now. Like we need allies. One of the things that I'm seeing though is that we are gaining more allies because with the globalization of information, with the internet, with TikTok, with Instagram, with all of that, there's much more communication between groups of people that otherwise would never have known about one another. So this is one of the reasons why what I do, my work becomes incredibly important. So Indigenous Bridges, my organization, basically, we're an international nonprofit organization that's made up of Indigenous leaders from all over the world. We have representatives from communities literally all over the world, Native American, First Nations, all the tribal nations out here in the Middle East that I'm not going to name by name because it'll take too long, a bunch in Asia, a bunch in Africa, like Australia, New Zealand. Like, our team is huge now, and it's made up of legitimate people whose work is known. And we all sort of understand that the fate of all of our nations is interconnected, because what the Jews are facing right now is an all-out attempted genocide, not just physically, but also culturally, from Islamist colonialism, which is now partnered with the left, because the left simply doesn't understand Islamist colonialism, and they don't understand the direction that they're careening into, which is shockingly and terrifyingly similar to what happened in Iran in the 70s.
Let's talk about that for a second, because it does seem like the people that are fighting against injustice, they feel like they see, that whole meme, this is what I do, this is what people think I do, this is what I actually do. They think that they are the protesters of the Vietnam era, but they are the protesters of 1979 Iran, where it was the students that brought in the revolution and that brought in this Islamist government to oppress them. And they were so adamant that it was the students that ushered that era in, and they were wrong.
Yep, that is exactly what happened.
And that's what we're seeing now in Western countries. It's
right. And
terrifying.
I think because the West, Europe is done for.
People keep saying Europe is done. What, there's no hope for Europe?
I don't think so. It's really terrifying. And there are certain countries like Germany who are now way too late trying to put in laws to prevent the complete takeover.
Because Germany understands what happens when fascism takes over.
Right, but they didn't want to be Islamophobic, and they were too worried about their reputation to put in common sense laws preventing the actual takeover of their country.
And I can't stand it when people want to be politically correct and say, when you want to say anti-Semitism, they say, and Islamophobia. Well, that is anti-Semitic in itself. Let's talk about these two things separately, because it's really harmful. It's really detrimental. I've seen it in newsrooms. I've seen it in universities. It's really dangerous.
The weaponization of the term Islamophobia is part of Islamist colonialism. It is a tool, right? A phobia is an irrational fear of something. And Islamophobia is meant to be on par with racism, which is a bigotry towards an oppressed group of people or a minority by a majority or an oppressive group, right? Now, Muslims worldwide are 1/4 of the world.
1.9 billion.
They've colonized the entirety of parts of Asia, the entirety of the Middle East, parts of Africa. Almost all of the armed conflicts and human rights atrocities happening in this region are because of the Islamist colonialism. The Arabization of the majority of the region as well. It's an ideology that's extremely rooted in supremacy, racial supremacy, ethnic supremacy, and religious supremacy, and violently genocidally so. And the entire stated goal is global domination, is the global caliphate. That is the goal. And so those of us who live under that or have had our families murdered by that, the Farhud, my Iraqi family, or the Arab cleanse, or people from Egypt, anybody that's from this region, any actual minority group understands that. But in the US, at this point in time where brown people are seen as minorities that need to be platformed, and whose voices need to be amplified. And Muslims are still a minority. America is still a Christian country. They're viewed by the left as in this sort of patronizingly, condescendingly way, oh, these poor brown people, these little savage brown people, and there really is this ideology of white supremacy in the US that makes people believe, especially the elite leftists, that those savage, uneducated brown people on the other side of the world, those backwards folks.
Which is racist in itself.
It's super racist. It is
It's the racism of low expectation.
but it's more than that. It's just overt racism to believe that those poor, backwards brown people from the Middle East, those people who ride camels, they can't possibly be capable of big, complicated things like white Europeans are, like, empires.
And October 7th was very complicated.
They couldn't possibly be able to do things like that. Or 9/11 also. There's just this, that is the racism of low expectations, but it's even deeper than that, because it's so rooted in white supremacy that
white saviorism
that they can't allow agency or humanity to people from this region. They can't comprehend that there could be an issue. And also in the US, like, to this day, yes, like, Middle Eastern people and Muslims are minority groups. So they're seen as minorities who do need to be protected. And yes, there are attacks against Muslims. And yes, there are attacks against Arabs. But the pushback against a global majority group, a global colonialist majority group, cannot be put in the same category as the genocidal colonialist attempt to exterminate a small indigenous minority group. Anti-Semitism and the threat that Islamist colonialism poses to Jews, and not just Jews, but all other indigenous groups in this region, is an existential threat. It's a tiny group of people facing an enormous group of people who have a lot more energy, weapons, money, and reach than, like, it's like trying to fight off a tsunami with a broom. And so to put Islamophobia in the same category as anti-Semitism is a slap in the face.
And it goes back with what you were saying with the numbers, 1.9 billion versus 16 million.
15.
It's 15 million.
And per capita, they're nowhere near the amount of attacks. Jews are being attacked everywhere right now. There's, what was it? The ADL released a report that more than one violent anti-Semitic attack has been reported an hour in the US alone. And that's not even counting the ones that don't get reported, which is the overwhelming majority of them. People are being killed in the streets of America. Holocaust survivors are being set on fire. Even 2 years ago, there was a Jewish activist who was killed. They claimed it didn't have anything to do with anti-Semitism. It obviously did. The man that was killed at the for holding an Israeli flag out near a Free Palestine program, they said that wasn't anti-Semitic either. Like, there's all of these things, all of these attacks that people are actively trying to cover up and pretend that they didn't have anything to do with the fact that the victim was Jewish. It's just making it so that the level of anti-Semitism is allowed to rise and rise and rise unchecked.
Well, I think that the worst part about all of this is the reaction from people. And I think a lot of Jews have felt this around the world, that after October 7th, a lot of people were just like, get over it, like, move on. And for Jews, that's impossible to do. And a lot of people lost their friends.
Like, your family has been murdered. Like, yeah, it's disgusting. And it's coming from people who really believe themselves to, like, advocate for victims of things. You had people like feminists who are justifying rape as a tool of war, which is a war crime, like, and goes against everything that they're supposed to stand for. So to answer your question, ultimately, like, how did I pull myself out of it? I don't know that I did pull myself out of it. I just do my own thing. But I'm appalled and horrified all the time by colleagues of mine in other human rights organizations who are either so soaking in anti-Semitic propaganda, who have such deeply internalized racism and bigotry, and it really, like, consumed so much propaganda that they no longer hold Jews to the same standard of humanness that they hold other people.
Like, what happened just before the Holocaust.
Yeah. Listen, the level of open and accepted and normalized and widely consumed anti-Semitic propaganda that exists in the world now is far greater than what happened prior to World War II. The World War II, there was no TikTok. There wasn't the internet, let alone Instagram. You couldn't have people like Mehdi Hassan, spewing his vile anti-Semitic bigotry on the news as, like, legitimate journalism. Al Jazeera hadn't taken over the West, which Al Jazeera is just Qatari propaganda. Qatar, Iran, Russia, China, and Turkey are all working together to spread these disinformation campaigns. And that's what, like, Russia's known for that. But I think that people just don't get it. Even people who should know better feel a lot of social pressure to conform to these propaganda narratives. They I've seen people in human rights prioritize the lives of terrorists over their victims, which I find goes against the entire point of advocating for human rights. I think at one point I believed this more, and now that I'm seeing what's actually playing out in the world, my priorities have changed a little bit. But there's the belief that like all human life is sacred, and you need to protect the rights of the perpetrator as much as the victim. What we're seeing is not that. What we're seeing is people protecting the lives of the perpetrators and not the victims. And that's not human rights. Our job as humanitarians, our job as people who actually advocate for human rights and social justice is to protect the victims. There's no moral equivalence.
But what's happening now is there's a like people can't see which is the victim and which is the perpetrator, because what I'm hearing is, well, October 7th wouldn't happen if XYZ, but what people are not responding with is no matter what happens, no matter what oppression, whatever, the response is not to murder and behead and light people on fire and rape and mutilate and destroy people.
Right.
Like that.
So A, there's no justification for that. And B, they didn't, like, people, what was it? What's his name? Guterres, the UN guy, who, by the way, was really close with a lot of Hamas leaders, in case you were not aware of that. Mm-hmm. He said, he was like, October 7th didn't happen in a vacuum. And he's right, it didn't. There is a long history of attacks by the same people against the Jewish community. Like, this is just another in the series of massacres. It just was that this one was well funded by Iran and Qatar, and had been planned for years, and was extremely successful in slaughtering and raping and killing more innocent people than the other ones had. But like, if you look at the Hebron massacre, or like, the Jerusalem riots prior to the state even existing, people want to start history at any convenient point in history for them, where they don't have to face the fact that like something provoked that,
Well, to that I say, let's go back. You say it didn't start in a vacuum? Okay, let's go back and actually see what happened. Let's go back. Let's go back to 1948, 1947. Let's go back before that. Let's go back as far back as you want to go back. I don't think that anything will change.
And I think it's really important to look at the psychology of people here. Facts don't matter to people. People have been bombarded with emotionally evocative propaganda, pictures of dead babies and like whatever, and like women clutching like Halloween skeletons, claiming
alleged, yeah.
And so their emotions have been triggered, and that we're like animals, like that triggers a lot in us, and we form opinions, and facts are not going to counter that. What is going to counter that is helping people see how they've been tricked. People are proud of their opinions. People have an emotional attachment to their opinions. And if they realize that they've been duped, if they realize that they are being used, which they are, if we can help people see how they're being played, that is much more effective in changing people's opinions.
How do you do that? That's fascinating to me.
You point it, you show it. You show how it happens. You show where it comes from. You're like, okay, this little tiny country right here, Qatar, and this country over here, Iran, are partnered with this country over here, Russia, and this country over here, China. And together they have had these conferences where they talk about how best to destroy the West, what pressure to put on what fissures in society. And you show them the video footage of these conferences, and you show them people talking about, we're going to get, and it's funny because it's like cartoonishly sinister.
What if they're not willing to look? Because how many people have seen the movie October 8th? How many people have seen the Hamas shot footage and body cams that they shot themselves? How many people are even willing to have a conversation? I've seen kids on the campus of the University of Pennsylvania holding up signs saying, I'm Jewish, let's have a conversation, and nobody wants to speak with them.
Right. So there are those people we're not going to reach. I'm funny because I'm like practical, like I work in human rights and I believe in science and stuff, but like also I believe in Judaism as well. And I think that one of the things that we're seeing is that people really are being sort of sifted. There's a line in Yetziat Mitzrayim, like the Exodus from Egypt, where it says, like Pharaoh was given the opportunity to let the Jews go. And he had his own ability, he had his own free choice. And he said no at first. And then at a certain point, we have this in our scripture that Hashem hardened Pharaoh's heart. So he made it so that he could no longer change his mind, right? It wasn't up to him anymore. Hashem was using him to make a point. And I feel like I've spent decades of my life talking to people who genuinely hate Jews. I've sat with neo-Nazis, I've sat with Nazis, I've sat with Hamasnikim, I've sat with PLO terrorists, I've sat with Black Hebrew Israelites. I've sat with all sorts of people that genuinely hate Jews. And once upon a time, I used to be able to have conversations with those people. I used to organize for Antifa. Those used to be my best friends. I used to be able to talk to those people. And I used to be able to find a point of something in them that I love, that I genuinely love, and I would relate to them in that way and they could relate to me back. That doesn't exist anymore. I cannot do that with people anymore because they can't see me as human anymore. Their hearts have been hardened. But not everybody is like that. You have a small group of people who are locked into their hatred, and they are not changeable. But the overwhelming majority of the world is not that. The overwhelming majority of the world either doesn't know, doesn't care, hasn't really formed an opinion. If they have, they're not so solid in it because they don't really feel like they're an expert, you know, and they're willing to hear you. And if we're able to show them, those people, they can see truth because they kind of care. So many of them don't. Many of them couldn't be bothered. You know, they're like, it's not me. I'm not Jewish. I don't care. You know, but the overwhelming majority of people don't have a strong opinion. You know, the Free Palestine people, which are the modern Nazi movement, they are very loud. They're very well funded. They are supported by some of the biggest fascist dictatorships in the world, but they're not a majority yet, right? Especially not in a place like America. And they can be reached, but we have to actually do it. And we have to have people within other communities that are allied with us that also have that information. And so it's really, really incumbent upon each and every single one of us to try to reach out. And I have to say that I've been really frustrated because I've been at this for a long time, right? And I saw this happening like a slow motion train collision for years. So I moved back to Israel many years ago. And in 2018, after Trump got elected, I saw all of it. Like, it was just pretty clear that when
2016.
Yeah, 2016. But in 2018, I came to the US. Basically, I saw all of this sort of like unfolding in slow motion and was like, whatever's going to happen next is going to suck for the Jewish people. And so now is the time where we need to start putting plans in action, creating relationships, right? Like, I'm a grassroots organizer. So I came to the US with my babies. I had a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old at the time. And I spent 3 years traveling between Jewish communities and Native communities and other groups of people, the diaspora, indigenous communities in the US, creating these relationships, like helping people see the situation for itself, helping people unpack the reality of what's happening in the Middle East. Because I knew that, you know, Trump sort of emboldening white supremacists and the visceral response that the left had to that, whatever was going to replace him was going to be like a whiplash, like, you know, pushback.
That was a time when a lot of people, a lot of Jews had this thought. I remember having conversations with a lot of Jewish people. What is the tipping point where you got to get out? Comparing that time to the Holocaust, I remember people saying, well, it's different now because Israel exists. And now we see people are attacking Israel in a way that I've never seen before. I mean, I really still don't know what is the tipping point, but it's a conversation that I heard that it came up a lot.
One of the things that I think is really terrifying is that what is it? It's like 70-something% of American Jewry leans left, right? Or did. I think it's changed quite a bit. I don't think it's changed so significantly, but I think that a lot of people have had similar experiences to me, and probably you as well, that the left is no longer a safe space for Jews. In fact, it's a openly dangerous space for Jews, and that has become a piece of the actual party platform itself. But the overwhelming majority of the left is anti-Semitic now. American Jews, and I found this also when I was trying to get funding for what I was doing, they just didn't get that there was anti-Semitic propaganda on the left, or that there was an anti-Semitic danger on the left, because again, they're so emotionally invested in their tribe, in their party, in their religion of leftism. And so, like, even my own family, they are scared for the existence of Jews, but they're not afraid of the right people.
There are a lot of people that don't feel comfortable on the left, but they also don't feel comfortable on the right. And it's that political homelessness, right, that makes people ask, at what point are we going to be actually homeless?
Yeah, I think that the sirens have been going off. Like, when Jews are killed in the streets, and when the police doesn't respond and the government doesn't respond with overarching condemnations and severe consequences, and in fact it's coddled, there is a real and growing danger, and it's time to get your paperwork together, you know, like. at the very least. And I think that the Jews that don't do that face real danger.
But so does the country. We have seen this historically. When the Jews flee for whatever reason and leave a country and there's no Jews left, then the country also faces great dangers itself. Yeah, we see this in Middle Eastern countries.
Every single case of a government system turning against its Jews has ultimately resulted in the complete destruction of that country, and it always will. And America is not immune to that, and Europe is not immune to that, and the UK is not immune to that. But there's an arrogance in every country, in every system, especially empires. And I think that that's a blind spot that people should be paying attention to. But it's true that Jews are the canary in the coal mine. However, and I want to pull this back a little bit towards the work that we've been doing, because we've been doing some really, really, really important stuff to counter this and other things. Ultimately, Indigenous Bridges is an international Indigenous rights organization. We focus on creating Indigenous sovereignty and safety and intertribal collaboration and solidarity globally, and all of our tribes are valued equally. But there is an understanding that Jews are the litmus test and that Jews are the canary in the coal mine, and especially with tribal nations out here in the Middle East, because they know we're one of the only people that regained our sovereignty in our indigenous homeland and pushed off not only the yoke of British colonialism, but also Arab colonialism. And so other indigenous communities in this region are really quite supportive of Jews and Israel and the state of Israel. And we are forming very real and very serious alliances with other tribal nations. And there are a lot of us, and all of us face the exact same hatred, violence, oppression, and genocide at the hands of the exact same people. And also all of us face the same disinformation campaigns. One of the communities that's really facing a lot of hatred right now, in addition to Israel, is India. India was attacked by Pakistan a month and a half ago, 2 months ago, whenever. And it was astonishing to see that the anti-Hindu, anti-India propaganda that was being used was literally verbatim recycled anti-Israel propaganda. It was the same talking points that were used to discredit Israel's experience of genocide after October 7th. It was the same claims of, those Indians, those Hindus are just colonists oppressing the indigenous Muslim population of Pakistan and intentionally targeting civilians and committing human rights atrocities. They're committing genocide. And they're Pakistan asked for a ceasefire and then broke it immediately, targeting Indian civilians. And the news in the West reported that India broke the ceasefire targeting Pakistani civilians. And I was like, I feel like I'm having deja vu. They're being accused of pinkwashing even. It's unbelievable. It's literally word for word copy pasted. The same anti-Semitic propaganda that's used against us is used against Hindus. Now, the difference is there's only 50 million Jews in the world, the entire world. And that's including old people and babies, right? Out of 15 million, how many of us actually understand our history, our experience, what's going on? Very few of us. Out of that small group of people, how many of us are willing to speak about it publicly? 5. There's more. We have a lot of amazing, amazing people out there, advocates doing God's work and incredible, incredible things.
So if you see this video, follow Ateret, follow me, follow the people that we follow. Support. I know it sounds vain, but it's so important. It's crucial. And I'm going to say it. I'm just going to say it. It's important because most of the people are getting their news on social media. And this is going on social media, and we need your support. And we need you to share this information. I need you to follow Ateret right now. I need you to subscribe to, look, it sounds crazy to say.
And the work of Indigenous
and Indigenous Bridges. Okay.
We're about to start a pretty big fundraising campaign because we're doing a whole bunch of really important projects, like a conference bringing Indigenous women's voices of the Middle East, Asia, and Africa together to talk about our shared experience of Arab colonialism and the gender-based violence that we've experienced. We're also doing
actual advocacy.
Yeah. And actual education, and most of our content's in English, so it's accessible to the West, and that's intentional. We're also bringing groups of Indigenous leaders from all over the world to Israel to talk about decolonization and partnering. We have all of these different groups. We're doing events in the U.S., we're doing events in Canada, we're doing events in the Middle East, we're doing events in India. We've got all sorts of things happening.
Amazing.
raise money for that. So it's really, really important because it's some of the work that we're doing has been critical in sort of pulling the rug out from underneath and also completely disintegrating a lot of the anti-Semitic and anti-Indigenous propaganda that's being like funneled into the West right now. There are a lot of people out there that are doing really good work. We happen to be some of them. Not to toot my own horn.
So baby steps, follow, get information, and then donate if you can later. But people aren't going to, donate without education. So baby steps. Yeah.
And it's important to amplify the voices of those of us who are speaking, like, and not just within the Jewish community, but also within the Hindu community, also within the Yazidi community, also within the Kurdish community, in the Persian community, there's a lot of people out there that are really trying to try and like protect the West from itself, from its own decline.
Yeah. The rights that we have in the West are being used against us.
Yes.
We're seeing that.
Yeah. Well, do you know about the paradox of tolerance?
Tell me.
So the paradox of tolerance is a really important thing that people don't understand. Western civilization has been responsible for some horrific atrocities, especially against Indigenous people. I will not even try to gloss over that because I am morally and ethically consistent. But one of the hallmarks of Western civilization at this point in time, at least in theory, is the belief in tolerance and multiculturalism. And people who want to view themselves as woke and liberal and progressive and tolerant, they have good hearts. They really do like want to make a positive impact in the world. So they're tolerant of people who are inherently intolerant of them. So the paradox of tolerance is this. It's that in order for a society to maintain its tolerant nature, it must necessarily be intolerant of movements, ideologies, and people who are extremely intolerant. Because if they allow for those movements, people, and ideologies to take root, take hold in their societies, they will take over and destroy it. So in order for a society to survive, and to be tolerant and to support the majority of its citizens and people that are in it and be a safe place, it necessarily has to be intolerant of intolerance.
I see that. And that was why the red flag really popped up when I heard the chants on Ivy League university campuses, and the security staff didn't even say anything, do anything. They weren't just saying free Palestine. They were saying there's only one solution, Intifada revolution. And I'm like, if that's not saying in your face.
Tel Aviv, we don't want no Zionists here. Say it loud, say it clear.
It's crazy that people are just not being intolerant of that, or the Hamas flags, or the Hezbollah flags, or any type of terrorist flags. They should.
ISIS flags are being flown in Toronto.
It's crazy that that's being allowed in the name of multiculturalism. That's not no.
Well, but like the UK, you can fly an ISIS or Hamas flag or even a swastika. But if you hold up a poster that's anti-Hamas or Hezbollah, you will get arrested.
What do they do to you if you hold up an Israeli flag?
Probably get lynched.
Really? I
mean, I've been more focused on the people being arrested for counter-protesting like ISIS. Wow. There was literally a man in the UK was arrested a few days ago for holding up a sign that made fun of Hezbollah. He was arrested. There were swastikas and ISIS flags and Hamas and Hezbollah flags being flown, but he was arrested.
We have been seeing that. And we did see the man that was basically murdered at he was holding an Israeli flag. Yeah, I forgot his name. I'm
in California.
Yeah. I want to wrap this up on a positive note. So as an advocate and somebody that's worked in these spaces for a really long time, what can people do, A, to recognize what's happening around them, and 2, to do some good work, actual good work?
So there is a lot of positive things that are coming out of what's happening right now. I don't want it to seem like it's all doom and gloom. I do think that there is a real existential danger posed to the Jews right now, and that if the world doesn't pick up on that soon, there will be real problems. But
common sense questions, it feels like.
listen to your inside voice. Like, if it doesn't feel right, it's probably not right. And do more research. Don't form opinions on things that you don't know about. You don't have to have an opinion about a conflict on the other side of the world. If you don't know about something, don't participate in it. I know, like, demonstrations and protests are super, super, super intoxicating. They're like really exhilarating to be a part of a movement like that, especially, you know, people think of themselves as like heroes for social justice. It's really intoxicating, and it's really like an ego boost, but it's not always the right thing to do. Sometimes you get sucked into a cult like the Free Palestine movement, and be a part of the Nazi movement like the Free Palestine movement or the Nazi movement in World War II. And none of us are immune from that. We all are human beings that are susceptible to propaganda. And so it's really important to be able to find voices that speak up on multiple sides of issues. If you really want to get involved in something, learn about all facets of it. Like, hear people's voices from all sides and understand where that information comes from. You know, who's funding it, who's spreading it, why is it so popular, and try to do the work to unpack these things, because a lot of people have these like deeply held beliefs that are completely rooted in falsehood, and because of that are being manipulated into being a part of a movement that goes against every fiber of their own actual belief system. And so I think it's really important for people to learn more, to listen to the voices of those of us who are actually here, who actually have expertise in the region. Like, I've worked in human rights for 22 years now in this region, and to actually pay attention. And in addition to that, there are really important things to get involved with. A lot of the work that we do is really, really amazing. You know, like and there is a growing movement now. There is a groundswell movement with nations from all over the world, indigenous nations, not governments, not countries, but the actual indigenous tribal people of the region here in the Middle East, Asia, and Africa are really starting to reach out together to one another and to work together. So Indigenous Bridges is forming a pretty solid and important coalition. And because of this coalition, we've actually saved thousands of lives. We were responsible for some of the coordination for the search and rescue teams that in Turkish-occupied Kurdistan during the earthquake that happened about 2 years ago, because we work with the Kurds. Some of the members of our team helped find and locate a Yazidi sex slave who was stolen in 2014 in Gaza, which people don't talk about.
Oh, that was your organization.
Not just us. I'm not taking credit for that. We played a very small role in that. That was a huge operation from people.
Wow. You were involved in that.
We work with Yazidis very closely for many, many years. And so we played a tiny, tiny, tiny minor role. I do not want anybody to think that we were responsible for that. We were a part of it. It was a lot of people, and Canada, Iraq, Israel, the US, and all sorts of places. There was a huge, huge, huge group effort, and it was not simple. But also, we got out a lot of emergency medicine and PPE and supplies to Native American communities that were hit by COVID, and were able to really prevent mass casualty events in certain places that I can't speak about. And we're getting water out to communities that don't have drinkable water. Like, there's a lot that we're doing here, and the connections between our nations are essential. So check out what we're doing. And we also promote the work of a lot of other organizations and people, because we feel like everybody who's doing good work should be, promoted and elevated. I'm all about collaboration as opposed to competition. I'm like, everybody should win. And by win, I mean be able to do the incredibly important work that we're all doing in order to save lives. But yeah, there is a lot that people can do. And learning about Jews is the first piece, especially for Jews ourselves. It is the first piece of what we should be doing. We should know who we are so that we know how to protect ourselves.
Really, really important. You brought up Passover, and I understand that, from our history, that a majority of the people were left in Egypt from our own history because we assimilated and we didn't believe it. That was part of the casualty.
Every major event in Jewish history, there has been a massive loss. Every transition point. And I don't think that, I pray and I hope that this, that our people can wake up and that we can all see truth and reality and understand where we're standing. And I think that understanding Jewish history would be helpful in that regard, because literally every point in Jewish history, whether it was World War II or Yetziat Mitzrayim, the leaving of Egypt, at every point, every big transition point, not everybody makes it. And I want us all to make it. I genuinely love our people.
We have this is the thing that people or look, like you said, they're looking to hang on to something, but we have such a rich history that's one of the oldest histories in the world, and we have thousands of years, and archaeology and history really support this, that we just have such rich culture and traditions that go back thousands of years. We say the same words and the same prayers that our ancestors said. It's so beautiful what we have, and I hope that we can wake up and appreciate it.
And one of the things that I think is helpful for assimilated Jews to understand, because assimilated Jews, especially in America, have been given this narrative that they're white European colonialist settlers and have white privilege and all of this, but we're not. That's not our legacy.
No.
We didn't participate in any of like the atrocities in any meaningful way at all in the United States. We are a small indigenous group we are indigenous to the land of Israel. And when we can learn to reframe our identity in that truthful way, when we can learn to see ourselves as an ancient indigenous community who has survived genocide after genocide at the hands of all of these different empires, maintained our unique culture, our unique language, our unique tradition, our dress, even our food cultures have been passed down since biblical time. We have, and our mysticism, we have this crazy traditions within our own culture and religion that people are always trying to like get their hands on. And we are an ancient indigenous group who has survived everything and are looked to by other communities as sort of the precedent for what they want for their people, because we're able to maintain our ancient ways and still have a foot in the modern world and be who we are. And we are still protecting our people. We are unapologetically, at least here, at least the majority of the people here, are unapologetically protecting our lives, despite the growing wave of stupidity and hatred that's out there. And I think that is powerful. And I personally have learned a lot, specifically from the Kurds. I work with the Kurds a lot. They're a large, feisty, fiery group of people, and I love them dearly. And Kurdish women are known for being like fierce warriors. There's a whole like women's combat unit that defeated ISIS, Kurdish and Yazidi women fighters. And Jews have this, especially Western Jews, have this, we feel this need to sort of like be introspective and like take ownership and responsibility and like admit our faults and like, apologize. And this is actually one of the things that I see Jewish activists and public speakers do that I think is extremely detrimental to our people, which is they'll acknowledge accusations that are false, or they'll put down, they'll be like, they'll be apologetic about it. They'll be like, well, I don't like Bibi, and I don't agree with what the state of Israel is doing, and but we still have a right to exist, And they think that other people hear that as them being like, wow, they're really like, they're really taking responsibility, and they're really what good people. Let's listen to them. But they don't hear that.
Yeah, no.
What other people hear is even this Jew hates the other Jews. Even this Jew, what the Jews are doing is wrong.
Bingo.
And Jews don't understand that, and we need to stop doing that. We need to stop apologizing, and we need to be strong and proud and fierce in the way that we present ourselves. And I learned from the Kurdish women that nobody respects apologetics, but people do respect like being proud of who you are.
They might not want to be our friends, but whatever. They might.
They're not our friends anyway.
That's true. They were never our friends. Yeah.
The people that hate us for being Jewish are going to hate us for being Jewish if we're proud of being Jewish or if we're apologetic about being Jewish.
Even if they were our friends for 15, 20 years.
Even if they were our friends.
Janet, thank you so much. That is so insightful. I really appreciate everything that you're doing and your perspective. And everybody needs to follow Ateret on Instagram. Where else?
Mostly Instagram, but me and Indigenous Bridges. I want to
Indigenous Bridges on Instagram.
We're on Instagram. Also, indigenousbridges.com is our website, and you can donate through there to some of our
indigenousbridges.com. We'll put the link in the description.
Amazing.
Thank you so much. Thank you for watching this video all the way through to the end. If you got this far, you must have really liked it. So please subscribe and also follow us on Instagram. It really helps us when you subscribe, when you like the video, when you leave a comment. It helps us to push it out to other people. So thank you so much for your support. I really appreciate it.